The wind howled like 1,000 wolves across the Montana wilderness, tearing through frosted pine trees and burying everything in its path beneath thick blankets of white. Snow fell in curtains so dense you couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, and the cold was the kind that bit straight through wool and leather, settling deep into your bones. In the distance, barely visible through the storm, a single light flickered a cabin window glowing orange against the endless gray, stubborn and warm in a world that had forgotten warmth. This was winter in Montana, the kind that doesn't ask permission. It takes, it buries, it erases. And in the heart of that storm, a woman stood at a crossroads between two kinds of cold, one outside her body and one deep within her chest. 3 days earlier, Clara Bennett had stepped off a train onto a frozen platform in the middle of nowhere, clutching a single leather suitcase and a folded letter she'd read so many times the ink had begun to fade. She was 28 years old, wearing a worn brown coat that had seen better days, and her face was pale with exhaustion and something deeper, the kind of weariness that comes from running out of choices. The letter in her gloved hand was simple, almost crude in its honesty. It spoke of a man seeking a wife, of a remote property, of honest work, and no family. It promised nothing except survival, and for Clara, that had been enough. She'd answered the ad out of desperation, a widow with no prospects and no future except the poorhouse or something worse. The mail-order bride arrived expecting hate, or perhaps indifference. She expected a man hardened by loneliness, maybe cruel, maybe broken by the isolation that came with living in a place where winter lasted 8 months and neighbors were 50 miles away. The platform was empty when she arrived, snow drifting across the weathered boards. She stood there shivering, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake, if perhaps no one was coming at all. Then she heard it, a horse's whinny cutting through the wind. A figure emerged from the white like a ghost, taking solid form. James McAllister was tall and weathered, leading a chestnut mare through the snow. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice, and his face was rough, carved by wind and sun and years of hard living. But his eyes, when they met hers, were steady, gentle, even. He stopped a few feet away and studied her quietly for a moment before speaking. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, his voice low and careful. Clara nodded, gripping her suitcase tighter, preparing herself for interrogation or disappointment. Instead, James tilted his head slightly and asked the strangest question. "Do you like snow, ma'am?" Clara blinked, caught completely off guard. Of all the questions she'd prepared herself to answer, questions about her past, her skills, her willingness to obey, this wasn't one of them. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I've never seen this much of it." James nodded slowly, as if that answer told him everything he needed to know about her. "Then we'd better get you inside before you decide you hate it," he said simply. He reached for her suitcase and she hesitated before letting him take it. His hands were rough but careful as he tied it to his horse and helped her up into the saddle. Then he climbed up in front of her, and without another word, they rode into the storm. They traveled for 2 hours through the wilderness without speaking. Clara held onto James's coat, pressing her face against his back to shield herself from the biting wind. The world became nothing but white and gray, the rhythmic crunch of snow under the horse's hooves, and the steady warmth of the man in front of her. She'd expected questions during this ride. She'd expected him to ask why she'd answered the ad, what she was running from, whether she could cook or clean, or fulfill whatever duties he had in mind. But James McAllister asked nothing. He only rode, shoulders hunched against the storm, guiding them through a landscape that all looked the same to Clara's untrained eyes. And somehow, that silence felt more dangerous than any interrogation could have been, because it left her alone with her own thoughts and fears. When the cabin finally appeared through the snow, it looked like salvation. It was modest, but solid, built from heavy timber, with a stone chimney releasing steady smoke into the gray sky. A small barn stood beside it, and warm light glowed from the windows like a promise. James dismounted and helped Clara down, catching her when her frozen legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Careful," he said quietly. "Ground slick." He led her to the door and pushed it open, and warmth rushed out to embrace her like a physical thing. The interior was simple but clean, a stone fireplace crackling with orange flame, a wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with canned goods and books. Everything was orderly, well-maintained, and profoundly lonely. James set her suitcase down and moved to the fire, adding another log. Sparks spiraled upward like tiny stars. "It's not much," he said, not looking at her. "But it's warm. You hungry?" Clara nodded, still unable to find her voice. This wasn't what she'd imagined. There were no demands, no coldness, no atmosphere of transaction, just a man offering her coffee and warmth as if she were a guest rather than a purchased bride. As he moved about the small kitchen with quiet efficiency, Clara finally found her courage. "Mr. McAllister," she began. "James," he corrected gently, still not turning around. She took a breath. "James, I want to be honest with you. I answered your ad because I had nowhere else to go. I'm not what you probably hoped for. I'm not young. I'm not." He stopped and turned to face her then, his expression unreadable. "That's enough." The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt something shift in her chest. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know you traveled 1,000 miles in winter to start over," James replied, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "I know you're brave enough to stand in a stranger's cabin and tell the truth. That's more than most." He handed her a cup, and his rough fingers brushed hers for just a moment. "You can leave in spring if you want. No hard feelings. But while you're here, you're safe. That's a promise." Clara's hands trembled around the warm cup, and for the first time in months, something inside her chest loosened. She realized she was crying not from sadness, but from relief so profound it hurt. Days passed and became a week, and the blizzard never stopped. The world outside became a white tomb, but inside the cabin, Clara learned a new rhythm. She cooked and swept and mended James's shirts by firelight. He chopped wood and fed the horses and checked his trap lines, always moving, always working. They ate together in companionable silence. At night, James slept on the floor near the fire while Clara took the bed, and he never questioned the arrangement or made her feel guilty about it. She learned that James McAllister was a man of few words but steady hands, who never touched her without permission, never raised his voice, never drank. And slowly, like ice melting in spring, the fear she'd carried across a continent began to thaw. One night, as Clara sat by the fire reading one of his books and James repaired a bridle at the table, she finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why did you place the ad?" His hands paused in their work. He didn't look up immediately. "Loneliness, I suppose," he said quietly. "You could have gone to town, found someone there." James set down the leather and finally met her eyes. "Tried that once, didn't take. I'm not good with people, Miss Bennett. I say the wrong things, or nothing at all. Most women want more than I know how to give." Clara felt her throat tighten. "And you think I don't?" she asked softly. James studied her face in the firelight. "I think you understand what it's like to be alone in a crowded room. I think you know the difference between words and truth." The observation was so accurate, it took her breath away. He saw her, really saw her. "My husband died 2 years ago," Clara heard herself saying, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Fever. We had no children. His family blamed me. Said I was cursed, that God was punishing me. They took everything, the house, his name, every penny. I had nothing left but shame and a reputation that meant I couldn't even find work as a seamstress." James stood and moved to sit across from her, close but not too close, respecting the invisible boundary between them. "You're not cursed," he said with absolute certainty. "You're just unlucky. There's a difference." Clara looked at him through tears. "Is there?" she whispered. Yes, James said firmly. Unlucky can change. Their eyes held across the small space, and the fire crackled between them like a living thing. For the first time since her husband died, Clara felt something she'd thought was lost forever: hope. The sound that shattered the night was sharp and terrible, a horse screaming in terror and pain. James bolted upright from his bedroll, grabbing his rifle in one fluid motion. "Stay inside," he commanded, and he was out the door before Clara could protest. She stood frozen for a moment, then moved to the window, pressing her face against the cold glass. Through the darkness and snow, she could see James's lantern bobbing toward the barn, and her heart hammered in her chest. Minutes felt like hours. When James finally burst back through the door, his face was grim and he was breathing hard. "Mountain lion," he said, already reloading the rifle. "Got into the barn. One of the horses is hurt." Clara's blood ran cold. "Is it still out there?" she asked. "Gone for now, but it'll come back. They always do when they're hungry enough, and winter's this hard." His hands shook slightly as he worked, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "I need to track it. Make sure it's not circling back." "In this storm?" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You'll freeze to death or get lost." James looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before: real fear. Not for himself, but for her. "I don't have a choice. If that cat's desperate enough to come this close, it won't stop with the horses." Clara grabbed her coat without thinking. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," James said firmly. "Clara, if something happens to you and I'm here alone, what then?" she challenged, using his first name for the first time. "I don't know these mountains. I don't know how to survive here, and I don't want to learn by being widowed twice." Their eyes locked, and she saw him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded once. "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say. Understood?" Clara nodded, her heart in her throat. They moved through the storm like ghosts, two lanterns cutting small circles of light through the darkness. The mountain lion's tracks were clear, large paw prints and drag marks, where it had been wounded somehow, probably by the horse's hooves. James moved with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in these mountains, reading signs in the snow that Clara couldn't see. She followed in his footsteps exactly, not daring to stray even a foot from his path. The wind tore at them, and the cold was vicious, but Clara barely felt it. All her attention was focused on James's back, on the rifle in his hands, on the knowledge that somewhere in this frozen darkness, a desperate predator was waiting. They followed the blood trail deep into the forest, where the trees grew so thick the snow couldn't penetrate as heavily. Each step was a gamble, each breath was a prayer, and Clara realized something profound in that moment. She wasn't following a stranger anymore. She was walking beside someone who'd already become home. The tracks ended at a rocky outcrop, and there it was, the mountain lion, crouched and bleeding, cornered and twice as dangerous for it. Its eyes glowed yellow in the lantern light, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. James raised the rifle smoothly, his hands perfectly steady now. "Get behind me," he said quietly, and Clara obeyed without hesitation. The lion's muscles coiled, preparing to spring. Time seemed to slow. Then the rifle cracked, sharp and final, and the cat fell. The sound echoed through the forest and was swallowed by the storm. Silence followed, broken only by their ragged breathing. James lowered the rifle and turned to Clara, checking her over with his eyes. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak, adrenaline still flooding her system. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder once, gently, and that simple touch said more than words could. By the time they made it back to the cabin, the first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. The blizzard had finally stopped, and the sky was pale pink and gold. The world was silent, clean, new, like the storm had washed everything away and left behind only possibility. James and Clara stood outside the cabin, exhausted and alive, their breath mingling in the cold air. Clara felt lighter than she had in years, like she'd shed some invisible weight during that long night in the forest. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. "The ad?" James looked at her with those steady, gentle eyes that had surprised her from the very first moment. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "Not even a little." Clara smiled then, a real smile, the first genuine one she'd managed in years. "I think," she said slowly, looking around at the snow-covered mountains, the crystalline trees, the impossible beauty of this harsh place. "I think I like the snow." James smiled back, just barely, but it was there, real and warm, and meant just for her. He said quietly, "Because it's not going anywhere." He offered his hand, not as a stranger or an employer, but as something else entirely, something new. Clara took it without hesitation, and together they walked into the cabin, into the warmth, into whatever came next. The mail-order bride had arrived expecting hate, but the cowboy only asked, "Do you like snow, ma'am?" And in that simple question, she found something she thought she'd lost forever, a reason to stay, a place to belong. A man who saw her not as a transaction, but as a choice. When spring came and the snow finally melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers, Clara McAllister was still there. Not because she had to be, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to be. Because somewhere between that frozen train platform and a night hunting a mountain lion, between silence and honesty and cups of coffee by the fire, she'd found something worth more than safety. She'd found home. And sometimes, that's all anyone really needs, someone who asks if you like the snow, and means it.